What is up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now in the last episode we dropped in the H22 in 5-speed into CB9's engine bay. We're able to torque down to factory spec all the motor mounts. Now in this episode we're going to go ahead and make the connections on the H22 in 5-speed. So let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put this front engine mount in position, which looks like a dog bone. So I've got the bracket from the F22 bolt up in these 3 holes right here. Dog bone goes through this slot right there. Once this bracket is bolted to the H22, I can go ahead and get the dog bone into the slot and put the bolt through. Now looking at the torque specifications here, it's only giving me the top bolt right here, which is 47 foot-pounds. It doesn't indicate the bottom bolt at the subframe. So seeing that most of these torque specs are 47 foot-pounds, just to be on the safe side, I'm gonna give this one 40 foot-pounds. So let's go ahead and get the bracket and the front engine mount set in position. Okay, and here's the wiring that we pulled from the inside of the car into the engine bay. This has the knock sensor and the VTEC solenoid. So I'm gonna go ahead and mock this up. I'm gonna pull this over to the knock sensor on the back of the motor, and I'm gonna mark it and go ahead and solder on the knock sensor itself. And after we do that, we can go ahead and connect to the actual VTEC solenoid for the other wire. So we can go ahead and get this wiring squared away. So let's go ahead and trim the wire up, get the connector soldered in position, and then we'll wrap up the loom with some electrical tape.
All right, guys, so I'm underneath the car now, and I'm facing the back side of the motor, and this green plug, that's our knock sensor. And then obviously this is our new wire right here that we pulled from the inside of the car. I'm gonna go ahead and peel back plastic wire loom, and I'm gonna go ahead and cut some wire just so I don't have an extra 2 or 3 feet here, which is what I've got. And then we'll go ahead and solder the connection from the knock sensor onto the wire that's inside this wire loom. And then we'll go ahead and tape things off when we make the connection. In addition to what's in this wire loom, we've also got the VTEC solenoid, so I need to be careful of how much I'm gonna cut back on that. So at least we'll get the knock sensor connected here, and I'll pull back some wire going into the VTEC area, and we'll go ahead and solder that connection, and we'll go ahead and make the final connections to the engine. So let's go ahead and do this. Now, safety first, before I go ahead and solder and put some shrink tubing on using the lighter, we're gonna go ahead and connect the fuel lines. So I don't want any source of open fuel. So this main fuel source right here plugs into the fuel rail with this 17mm right there. And do not forget the washers. And here's our secondary fuel hose. I'm gonna go ahead and disconnect this regulator right here. I'm gonna go ahead and plug it into the H22 regulator on the F22 rail. And that's basically how the fuel connects. So let's go ahead and make these 2 connections. All right, got some success underneath the car. So I got the coolant hose hooked up to this main coolant line on the backside of the H22. This was tough itself, so thank God I had some pliers specifically designed for coolant hoses. Went ahead and tie strapped the oil pressure sensor wire onto the existing wire loom just so this wire wasn't hanging free. Went ahead and got the knock sensor plugged in position, and then went ahead and put a tie strap on the knock sensor wire just to secure it in position. So got some success underneath the car, so I'm gonna go ahead and crawl out and see what we can get from the top side now. Okay, next step, I'm gonna go ahead and mount the main lower pulley with the 19mm. Now remember, this is torqued down to 159 foot-pounds. So I've got the torque wrench ready, and I've got the Honda tool with the breaker bar held in place. So my friend Joel's gonna hold the breaker bar while I get the torque wrench on the main bolt, and we're gonna torque it to 159 foot-pounds. So let's go ahead and get this done. All right guys, I actually had to loosen these two 17mm bolts on the driver's side mount. I didn't have the access required on this main pulley right here with the Honda tool that goes into this hexagonal opening, let alone getting access to my 19mm, so I went ahead and lowered the engine just a little bit. That's probably just a small characteristic of this H22. So now I've got the thing lower down, and I've got my floor jack with a piece of wood for safety. So Joel and I are now gonna torque this thing to 159 foot-pounds. Okay, one last step before we wrap it up for the day. I'm gonna go ahead and take this engine harness with these 3 plugs. We're gonna plug into the body harness right here on the strut tower, and then go ahead and plug in the ABS sensor, and then also this ground wire that's on the engine. So the ground wire goes in 2 locations, one right here on the valve cover and one right here in the motor mount. And then obviously these 3 plugs, you can't mix these up. And you take this metal bracket that's right here, and we're gonna go ahead and secure it onto the strut tower itself. So after those connections are made, we should be squared away in electrical aspects on the driver's side here. Okay, in order to keep track of where we're at with things with the H22 and 5-speed connections, I've established a little checklist here. So yesterday, we got these things completed: crank pulley bolt, knock sensor, VTEC solenoid, and the coolant hose on the backside of the H22. So as you can see here, we've got still a long list to go, but we're gonna go ahead and knock some more things out today, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and connect these shifter cables to the transmission. As you can see here, this is the small one. And then right here, this is the large one with the shaft on the side. So obviously the larger shifter cable goes onto this one. And the smaller shifter cable right here will go into the smaller connection right here. And then how we'll make the connection. You've got the metal washer and the plastic washer. Plastic washer goes on the inside, metal washer goes on the outside. Then you attach with a cotter pin. And then these brackets right here, let me show you where these go. Okay, so these brackets right here and right here, you've got this cylinder right here, and this cylinders will sit right inside here. And then once these cylinders are in the slots right here, you're gonna take those clips and you're gonna drive them south. So you might have to get creative and take a socket extension and a mallet and just drive them in, because it's gonna be tough to get those clips in. So let's go ahead and get these shifter cables mounted and installed. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and reinstall the axles on CB9. So this is the 5-speed axle that I got from the salvage yard. Had to replace the inner boot on this. And this differs a lot from the automatic version. So if you're doing a 5-speed conversion, just make sure you have a 5-speed axle. The passenger side axle is the same with the automatic and 5-speed. So we're gonna go ahead and start on the easy side, which is passenger, and we'll go ahead and do the driver's side next. So let's go ahead and get this done. Okay, just buttoned up everything on the underside of the motor for this driver's side axle. Made sure that the axle was driven correctly into the transmission. So I basically just kind of pushed and pushed and pushed and felt it click. So that thing is situated where it needs to be. So I went ahead and secured the axle bracket that's secured to the back of the engine block. So there's 3 14mm bolts, 1 on the bottom, 2 on the top. This needs to be aligned perfectly, otherwise you can risk stripping out the threads. Now I can go to the top of the car and finish off putting the rest of the axle through the hub assembly and putting the shock back on and tightening everything back up. Alright guys, I don't know if you can see what's going on here, but I'm in the passenger side fender well, and there's one nut on the transmission mount that I cannot get access to from the top of the engine. So I'm going to go ahead and do is take a crow's foot with an extension and use my torque wrench and torque it down to 28 foot-pounds. It's basically in the vicinity right above here on all the sheet metal. So, and here's my torque wrench. I set it to 28 foot-pounds. I have an extension on there, the crow's foot. So let's reach up in there and tighten things down. All right, so here's a dilemma I'm facing with using the H22 power steering pump and the CB9 power steering line. This power steering line is much smaller than the outlet of the H22 power steering pump. So I tried to stretch it over there. It was cracking it, so that wasn't working. So I was gonna try to replace this canister with a Honda Prelude unit, but it doesn't reach quite as far. Plus there's 2 outlets, one right here and one right there, whereas the Honda Prelude only has 1 small outlet and 1 large outlet, while this one has 3 outlets. So that's not gonna work. So I've taken the hose off the Honda Prelude unit, cut a nice end off,
make it nice and square. And then we're gonna go ahead and put this on to the H22 power steering pump. And there's a special splice that I ordered at the auto parts store, which goes from a 5/8 to a 3/4 inch. So when I put the H22 hose into position, I'm gonna go ahead and line it up with the CB9 hose. I'll make a cut and we'll go ahead and put that splice into position, put the clamps on, and hopefully it should work out. So I'll go pick up that part store tomorrow. Okay, next thing I'm gonna deal with is the main engine ground and the starter cable. So right here is the starter cable right here. As you can see here, the rubber is starting to break down, deteriorate, chip away. There's no more protection for the bolt that goes onto the starter right there. So I've got a spare Honda Prelude battery cable, and it had a nice condition starter cable cover. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut this off. I'm gonna slide on the new position, put this on the terminal, bolt it down, and we should be good to go. And regarding the main engine ground right here, it's branched off from this wire system. That will be connecting down here on the transmission right below the starter. So those are the two main connections you need to make for your battery cables. Okay, next step, let's go ahead and connect our throttle cable. Basically feeds to this bracket right here, loops onto this butterfly valve, and then we'll go ahead and tighten that nut up. Okay, received the manual transmission front dog bone mount right here, and this is the automatic version that came in CB9. Now, it's a little bit hard to tell on camera, but this notch is about 1/4 inch higher than this notch right here. So for whatever reason Honda had on the automatic versus manual transmission, I have no idea, but I took measurements and it's 1/4 inch off. So let me go ahead and show you the differences while it's in the engine bay. Automatic version. As you can see, this hole is a little buried here on this bracket. Let me go ahead and show you the manual transmission version. And here's the manual transmission version. See how the hole is a lot more exposed? It's going to be on the tight side. But since this is rubber, it's got some movement to it, so it'll just be a little snug opening right there. So I've got the dust covers in position. Go ahead and shove the bolt right through. Put the nut in position and torque it down to 47 foot-pounds. Okay, let's go ahead and fill up that transmission with some manual transmission fluid. I'm using Honda manual transmission fluid, obviously, right here. And this funnel with my rubber tube, this is my little contraption I made years ago so I can fill up manual transmissions. All right, so looking at the transmission next to the CB joint, this is your transmission fill bolt right here. It actually has a crush washer on there. This is a 17mm. And then right below here, where that 3/8 opening for a ratchet is, that's your drain bolt. We don't need to do that right now because this transmission's empty. And when I bought this transmission, I made sure all fluid's out of it. So let's go ahead and undo the 17mm, put the tube in there, and start filling some transmission fluid. All right, guys, that's all the time we got for today's episode. As you can see, there's just so many steps involved with making all the reconnections on a motor and transmission once it gets dropped back into a vehicle. Hope you guys can follow along next time where we make all the final connections, and hopefully we can take that key and make that turn and the H22 just turns over and purrs like a kitten. If you guys like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe. Have a great day.